Hello everybody, this video is about the novel approach for EO sterilization validation, which is instead of demonstrating the sterility assurance level based on a meaningful and reliable kill rate at the most challenging locations of the device. This novel approach is rather relying on product tests of sterility without calculating a meaningful kill rate. But this I'm going to explain in more detail later. We saw this approach already applied on the field sometimes, and you will find it described in the draft standard ISO DIS 11135, which you can download online already. I put a link into the video description. In this video, I want to describe our serious concerns with regard to this approach, which we also share with other experts in EO sterilization from the industry as well as from regulatory bodies. And after watching this video, you will hopefully understand the reason why a validation based on this approach might be dependent on, among other, the physical aspects or the physical properties of your device, not be accepted by, for example, regulatory bodies, and why it might lead to a significant increase of unsterile products released to the market if this approach would be applied globally. My name is Manuel Grandy, and I'm here representing SteriComp, that's a German consulting firm specialized in sterilization of medical devices. So let's start with the very basics of SAL calculation in EO sterilization as used for decades, and from there then explain and judge the novel approach. So this diagram here is explained in more detail with some more details here on it. In this Steris video, I also linked into the video description and also the SAL calculation from minute 17. You will find a lot of details very well described. So the EO dwell time needed for a specific SAL, sterility assurance level, is always calculated based on a meaningful kill rate. Okay, and the kill rate is the spore log reduction per time, or more specific, the D value. So for example, from 10 to the 4 to 10 to the 3, if this reduction would take 1 hour for the specific cycle and device, then you have a D value of 1 hour, okay? And then as additional information, 12 spore log reductions or more than 12 spore log reductions, substantiating them is then an overkill cycle. So now you have two ways to establish this kill rate, or two test sets, let's say. And one is to show a total kill of a certain biological burden. So here, for example, a BI of 10 to the 6. And if you show total kill, you demonstrated a spore log reduction of 6. We know that in practice, most likely it was more than that, but let us ignore this here on this basic level. So a spore log reduction of 6 in, for example, 6 hours, following this example here. And now to reach this 12 spore log reductions, you would simply add another 6 hours, which would then lead you to a spore log reduction of 12. So again, you established a certain kill rate, and from there you will calculate the time needed for your SAL. This is the basic idea. And now you could also show it or establish a rate with a sublethal cycle where you reduce from 10 to the 6 to 10 to the 3 in, for example, 3 hours. Okay, so you have some survivors. And now you just take the 3 spore log reductions in 3 hours and you extrapolate it again to the SAL of 10 to the 6, which would then theoretically, in practice different, but theoretically lead to a 12-hour cycles. So this is the very basics of this approach. And now let me just add another point that I think is important to understand. With a BI of 10 to the 3, CFUs instead of 10 to the 6, you will theoretically get the same p value. Okay, so if you use a BI of 10 to the 3 and reduce it to 10 to the 0, this would theoretically also take 3 hours. Okay, because it's simply the d value is by definition not dependent on the starting population. Okay, so why did I add this bullet point here? And that's because that argument, I hear it often in the context with the novel approach, saying if you don't have 1 million spores at the most challenging location, it would be not representative to place such BI there. And this is really not a valid point when you look at the very basics, as I just explained. The main reason why you're adding or placing a BI with such high numbers at this position is not why you would expect such numbers there. It's because it's practical to it's a practical number to be used to determine a kill rate. For example, you would find a certain amount of survivors after a sublethal cycle, which has a certain EO dwell time. But you can do this also with lower BI populations, and depending on your test set, it at least theoretically it would lead you to the same result. So I think that's a basic flaw in this approach, but we will anyway come to this novel approach later. So now important to understand is that the product D value depends this product D value here, as it is shown here, for example, for let's say this is a device stored at the most challenging location, a very challenging device consisting, for example, on a volume which is only accessible through a very long and very narrow lumen. So this D value here depends on these two main criteria, and one is the type of microorganism. So if you would change it, so you keep this BI at the most challenging location, which in this case would be obviously inside of that inner volume of that device. If you change the Bacillus atrophaeus to a very easy to or very less resistant microorganism type, then this would lead to a much lower D value, of course. And the second point is the position, okay, of this microbial burden. So if you place it at the most challenging location again, like here, if you take it out of that location, also if it's a Bacillus atrophaeus, of course it will lead to a lower D value because this position, so for example, outside of that device, okay, which it's also a suggestion or could be a suggestion of this novel approach. If you choose this position, of course, the D value will again be lower because it's much easier accessible for EO and for Steam, for example. So now, if you say I do have a very low bioburden in my device, also at the most challenging location, what you could do is you could say I don't show 12 spore lock reductions. I go for the bioburden. If you have consistently low bioburden, you could go for the Annex A of the current standard and simply show, for example, 9 spore lock reductions. Okay, so this would appropriately address the fact that you have a very low and consistent bioburden, rather than placing a BI of lower population. So I hope this is clear now. So now another interesting question. What about the usage of the bioburden instead of the BI to determine the D value or the kill rate? And using a BI has a lot of advantages, and this is why I personally think that it is the better approach and the more practical approach. And this is, for example, the type of microorganism. So the BI is consisting of on a very clear type. So, for example, the Bacillus atrophaeus, and all other types you will find in your product bioburden. later in routine production over the years would be of most likely lower resistance, okay? But with your product bioburden, or with your bioburden, you don't know this. At the day of testing, it could be very easy to sterilize types, and later in routine could get challenging types, okay, of microorganisms. And the second is the position, okay? So the bioburden you could put at your most challenging or put into your most challenging location. For the product bioburden, well, you don't know at the day of testing what is the product bioburden at this challenging location. You could figure it out, you could measure it, which would be challenging, but usually you won't do this, and you don't have much influence on this. With the BI, um, I placed it at the most challenging location. And the third point is the number in this case, okay? You need a certain starting point to say, going with this total kill basic tested again, you need to know the starting point to say it was 6 Bollock reductions. So this is another important aspect why this usage of BI makes so much sense. So to wrap this up, if all this is considered, if you are using a BI, a Bacillus atrophaeus, at the most challenging location with, for example, 10 to the 6 spores, and if you established your cycle with this, for example, 12 spore reductions, if you did this, then you are quite sure that your bioburden um, for a variety of types and also for spikes for higher bioburden um, will be less resistant than what you showed for the validation. And you can rely on your validation if you are following this approach. So, so now let me explain the basic test set for the novel approach. You will find the main part in the ISO DIS in chapter B4. There are some other sections, but this is the most important part to understand the basic test set and the basic approach, basic novel approach. So first, you demonstrate the appropriateness of the internal PCD by showing growth of the BI inside the PCD and a total kill of the product bioburden after a sublethal cycle. So this might sound familiar to you. That's because it is similarly described in the current version of the standard in chapter D86, approach 2. But there is a very important difference. Just look it up by yourself. There is written appropriateness of the BI, and it's not the appropriateness of the PCD, which is a very, very big difference. Okay. So this is new here, and this is basically the very basics of this approach. You say my PCD is appropriate if I show growth on the BI inside the PCD and total kill of the bioburden. And then from there, I can use that PCD to establish kill rates and do a cycle development. So for example, you had like before a 12-hour cycle, you have now a new PCD which is much lower in D value. You would in the cycle development reduce, for example, to 6 hours or 5 hours. So what you need is minimum lethality needed. Or also you could reduce the concentration, which is, by the way, the main reason for this novel approach. And from there, then you would do your validation or your MPQ again with this PCD. Okay. So now this comparison here sounds logical at the beginning, but it does not give you the D value at the challenging locations of the device. It's nowhere described and it's not suitable for this. And this I will show you later in more detail. The D value of the bioburden there can be significantly higher than of the PCD. So for example, following this example of the highly challenging device, which has an inner volume and a long and very narrow lumen, So the D value there, and there can be very significant amounts and very varying bioburden also in case that you have some manual assembly, for example. But also regardless of this, the bioburden there with regards to the D value can of course be much higher than the D value of a PCD which is placed outside the device. Okay, and this is the main issue with this approach here, and you will see it later in the diagrams quite clearly. So the simple question that could arise from there is the cycle lethal enough at this location? Okay, is there enough EO and steam reaching to reduce possible spikes, for example, in bioburden, or to reduce also very consistent bioburden to an SAL of 10 to the minus 6. So you don't know this if you do this comparison here, okay? And the second point here to mention is the comparison gets even less reliable the higher the variances in bioburden. So there the question is, was there any bioburden at this location of the day of testing, or just very low bioburden in numbers? And what about the routine? How do I evaluate peaks? So there could be some higher bioburden, and then it is getting less reliable, the approach. I will show you this later on the graph. It's easy to understand there. And the third point, what I would like to mention here, and this really puzzles me. A novel approach is not statistically substantiated, for example, in papers or literature. I did not find anything which address the issues that I will show later now also in more detail. So if you are aware of such literature, please add it to the comments of this video. I'm not aware of anything, and I searched in detail. So let us start with an example where this novel approach actually works. Okay, so it's doing what it should do, and I guess what it was intended to do. So the scenario is again this highly challenging device, which has a 12 hours dwell time for a 12 spore lock reduction if you use the BI at the most challenging location. And similarly, the bioburden has a similar D value. It has 100 highly resistant microorganism at the most challenging or very challenging locations at the day of testing, okay, at the day where you perform your sublethal cycle. And now you choose a PCD, which is very easy to sterilize, so a D value of 10, okay, while this is a D value of 1 hour, okay. So if the survivor lines meet at the upper part of the diagram here, the novel approach would indicate that the PCD is not appropriate due to growth of the BI versus no growth of the test of sterility. So the bioburden, it is for the bioburden at the day of testing, as I said already. And usually you would not know this starting point, okay? It's very difficult to define this. But let's assume it simply is like this at the day of testing. So now, if you run a sublethal cycle in this window here, from here, for example, you would already, you would see growth from your product bioburden here. Look at the chances here. And for your PCD, you would probably, or with a fair chance, get no growth. So the approach works. It indicates that the PCD is not resistant enough. And same if you go a little bit higher in the EO dwell time or EO contacting time. Here still, the PCD is quite for sure, there is no growth from the PCD. but from the product test sterility, you still have a good chance that you see some growth. So this works, okay? And now you would choose a PCD of higher resistance, okay? And let's say a more realistic one also. And here you would, here the approach is getting into trouble. So when increasing the D value of the PCD where the survivor lines are crossing at the y-axis at 10 to the 0, so like here, and again, this is the Y burden at the day of testing, then the novel approach might tell you that the PCD is appropriate, okay? Because here, if you run the sublethal cycle here, you might get growth of the PCD and you might get no growth on the product bioburden, okay? Whilst it is not, the SAL for the product bioburden is just 10 to the minus 2, okay? Because you would adapt your cycle to 4 hours from 12 to 4, and which is good for your PCD, which you just decided it would be appropriate, but for your product bioburden, which is the important one, you just have an SAL of 10 to the minus 2. So hopefully this explains the main issue of this approach. The D value can be of the product bioburden can be much higher than the D value of the PCD you choose. Okay, the approach is not helpful there. So now another example, a D value with a bioburden with a lower D value and lower in numbers. Okay, now the issue is that you can also choose a PCD with low resistance and do this comparison, and it gets worse. So the SCL now is even lower than, even less, so worse than 10 to the minus 2. It's 10 to the minus 1.6 or something. It's just an additional note. Now a more probable example with the survival plots crossing at y-axis 10 to the minus 1. So this is more probable here. You do the sublethal cycle here. You will most probably see growth on your PCD, a total kill on your product bioburden, but also with this line here, the SAL is 10 to the minus 2.8, which is of course not enough. And this is the actual SAL of the device if you have this bioburden in routine production. So now you just had it at the day of testing. We had assumed it can be also higher in routine production, and then of course your SAL gets worse. Okay. So it's getting better. So down to an SAL of an actual SAL of 10 to the minus 5. The closer the D values of the PCD and the bioburden gets. Okay, but remember, the D value of the bioburden is not established with the novel approach in a usable manner. So you don't know if you have this kind of situation here. And still, you have a certain level always of bioburden fluctuations. This bioburden can be higher than, okay? Just here an important or an interesting thing to note. So here is a certain, this distance here, you can establish when you show a certain number of survivors and on the PCD, and this distance here you can establish somehow when you show a certain number of kills or several cycles. So that could be a way how to make this statistically work. But right now, this is not at all addressed in the draft standard, which is getting us to the potential improvement of the novel approach. So I will just quickly go through it. You can perform multiple sublethal cycles initially and periodically. Then measure the bioburden at the challenging location at the day of testing. You can define minimum sample sizes, restrict to products with bioburden relatively constant over time, request strict hygiene control and bioburden monitoring, and define a significant growth ratio for the PCD. So all this would help to improve this novel approach. And I'm sure there are other things you could do. And seven here to mention, build a reliable statistical foundation. For example, in papers, you need this for such kind of novel approach. Just look at the ISO 11137, which is also using product tester sterility. You cannot really compare radiation sterilization with EO, but nevertheless, just with regards to the statistical foundation, have a look on it, and it's very clear and it's adding up. Whilst this approach right now it's not adding up, and it's also there is no statistical foundation I am aware of. So built it and create a paper after doing some improvement. So define this and other requirements here or improvements might lead for specific devices and cycles to a reliable and efficient approach. So similar requirements are already applicable for the far more reliable approach defined in the ISO, the current ISO standard in Annex A, just as a comparison. So let's have a quick summary. The basic novel approach sounds logical first, but cannot reliably demonstrate the sterility assurance level, as the d-value of the bioburden at the most challenging location can be still much higher than of the PCD, and the bioburden in routine can vary significantly. There might be a chance to use the proposed basic idea of using the product tester sterility to show the appropriateness of the PCD in case the approach is improved and substantiated in, for example, papers. And last point here, SteriComp suggests applying the existing approaches defined in the current standard Annex A and B with the VI placed at the most challenging location, at least until development and substantiation of alternative approaches, if such approaches are always, if they are needed, what cost is always the question. So thank you very much for watching this video. It was quite long, so I hope you followed. Please contact SteriComp if you want to discuss this approach further. And of course, also if you want to discuss other topics. And please get involved discussing this approach online, for example, commenting this video, and also offline with your peers. So thank you very much again for watching. I wish you all a great day. Bye-bye.